Hola, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. It's 4 o'clock p.m. in Madrid. From here to the whole world, welcome you on streaming as well. This is Madrid Platform, the first hub for relations between Europe and Latin America. More than 300 companies, more than 500 experts, and many meetings so that we can bridge the gaps between Europe and Latin America. We're going to talk now about international taxation. Alejandro Gallardo will be chairing this roundtable. He is CEO, and he'll be introducing us his guests. A good afternoon to you all. Those of you following us through streaming, it's a pleasure to be here on our third day at Madrid Platform. 3 very interesting days, and this is a very important topic in business, namely international taxation and the treaties between Spain and Latin America, and within Latin America as well. We'll be talking about related transactions, double taxation agreements. Here we've got Cristian Núñez, partner and general director of MHS Ecuador, Sergio Luna, general director, an expert in international taxation, and Gabriel Vargas, partner of MSH Global Mexico. We also have Patricio Salgado, managing partner at MSH Global Chile. I am working with him every day. Good afternoon, Patricio. How are you? Fine. It's a pleasure to accompany you today. So we'll try to contribute as much as possible to the debate. Okay, so first of all, we'd like to give you some context on the topics we're going to deal with. Patricio Salgado, he cannot be here because of the closure of borders in Chile. We would be delighted to have you here face-to-face, but we'll ask you a question so that you can give us some context on international taxation. First of all, taxation topics are very sensitive for many of those here present. Thank you very much, David, Rafael. And when making decisions on an international scale, they take into account the taxation systems of each country, and it's one of the main factors when making a decision. In that respect, governments are taking into account that factor, have been taking into account those factors in the last 10 or more years through double taxation treaties. And how can we define those treaties? Patricio. Well, yeah, it's quite a simple answer that I can give you. By signing those conventions, we try to be more efficient in economic terms. Investment decisions should not be hampered by decisions related to taxation, and tax neutrality is a factor as well. How can we be more graphic? When we provide a service to a third country where there is no convention in force, we could come to an absurd situation, namely having to pay double taxes, both in the country producing the income and the one receiving it, and that is detrimental to the company, and that will affect decisions when making investments on the part of entrepreneurs. So these concerns were raised internationally, and different conventions have been gradually signed so that double taxation is not the case. May that be through the change of local regulations with different regulations in order to remove double taxation. And we also sign these conventions where very clear rules on how certain types of operations or transactions are going to be taxed. For example, profit from entrepreneurial income or dividends or capital earnings, etc. So we've got this mechanism in place so that one tax is not paid twice on two occasions. And in the treaties, we've got two mechanisms. On the one hand, a tax exemption is established, for example, in the country where the income is received, and the other alternative is to tax in the country where the income is generated. And once that income arrives in the destination country, there's a mechanism in order to avoid double taxation as well. Most of the conventions signed by the countries are along those lines. And this has been quite an efficient measure. Of course, we need to see each situation case by case to see how the tax exemption can be best applied. So it's all about avoiding double taxation, being neutral in tax terms, and not affecting investment in one country. But rather, we need to facilitate exchange of capital and services among the different jurisdictions. Yes, taxation treaties facilitates these conventions. So when going to a new country, things are easier. So every time we've got a company coming to our country to expand operations or to start investing in a new country, this is a good way to set the rules in related transactions. One of the concerns is not to have clear rules. So this helps us. And there's another concept. Christian is going to talk about that, namely relations between the parent company and subsidiaries, related operations, related transactions. Could you tell us a bit more about this economic link, these related transactions? Well, that happens when there is a relationship between two companies or between a parent company and a subsidiary. So that link mainly refers to the way this relationship between companies is managed. Actually, there are different controls for related transactions. There are very specific regulations on how to control and manage all those transactions or operations. Of course, we also have the issue of transfer. It is important to understand the concept, because depending on the concept of related transactions that we use, taxation will be dependent on that. So every time we are going to do that sort of business internationally, we need to know what determines that link in the operations. If my participation is important, or whether I can manage the other company in a way, that's what generates a link, an economic link. Yes, in relations between parent company and subsidiary, we can have a subsidiary, an agency, in the case of Chile, depending on the solvency and other factors, or we could have a branch as well. So, Sergio, which aspects should we take into account in these sort of transactions between parent company and subsidiary? Well, that's a topic that admits many comments. This is something companies going to another country need to take into account. For example, a company establishing a subsidiary or a branch permanently, they need to send the currencies in order to start that business in our countries. Because of money laundering, there are certain banking policies restricting the operation. When a new company or a branch starts operating, the new subsidiary is not really independent. They always depend on the parent company. So they need to see how they can manage their own resources, recruit their employees, to set their offices. For example, a Spanish company trying to go to Latin America, normally a couple of people come to establish themselves in Latin America, and they face different problems, how to pay the salaries to the employees, whether it will be done from Spain or on site. All these factors need to be considered by parent companies in order to know how that's going to impact on their financial statements. The parent company could charge an administration fee to the branch. It could be done monthly, and the prices of transfer should be taken into account as well, because each country has different fees applicable. So the best would be to pay those fees in the country where taxation is lower. But governments are realizing that they are being harmed by that loss of tax income. With the double taxation agreements, the aim for us is to have that branch to pay their taxes where their activity generates products or services, so that the parent company does not have to pay taxes again. And so we avoid double taxation. It depends also on the fees established, and these concepts are very important when developing an operation, a transaction between the parent company and the linked or the related company. In branch operations, companies with these double taxation agreements say, either you pay taxes in one country or in the other, but sometimes income stays in one part. Sometimes we are told, yes, you have already paid taxes in this country, but we tell them, yes, but I do not only need to take income, but also expenses to the destination country. Each business has its own singularities, but in general terms, that's what we should take into account. Yes, of course, the nature of the service provided by the parent company, what the concept of the invoicing is, depending on what the regulating authorities establish, we all need to take that into account. The parent company normally sends a few people of the team to the destination country, and once we are going to advise one company, always has to do with the legal representative. We've got 5 countries here, but of course there are certain requirements in Colombia. I would like to give the floor to Gabriel now. What would be the situation in Mexico? Well, in Mexico, we manage a company either through an administrator or a board of directors. We could have a local administrator, and in that case, taxes to be paid related to that person because of their work or other concepts will be the ones derived from that person's income. In case we've got someone coming from abroad and establishing themselves in the destination country, they actually receive their salary in the country of origin, and it is in that country where he or she will have to pay taxes. And here we've got a little problem because that person will have to apply for a reimbursement, and he'll or she will have to take into account expenses as well. What the company pays or earns is income tax. And if that applies to a legal person or a natural person, it could be from 1.82% to 30%, and for a natural person, it could go from 1.82% to 35% of income. That will, of course, depend on the amount of income the person receives and on different factors that are established in certain tables before implementing the percentages I just mentioned. So for a person who comes from abroad, they can pay taxes in one place or other, depending on where they receive their salary.
If it's going to be paid through the parent company, the country of origin, it'll be paid to that subsidiary, and it'll be paid in the office where that benefit or that profit is being made. And then there's another issue that we can talk about later, which is the sending currency home when the taxes have been paid, or special taxes need to be paid to repatriate currency. And does it matter what type of company it is, if it's a resident company or not? No, it's not the type of company that has an impact. There's an important point here, that depending on the type of company, it could be administrator or a board. There are companies where it has to be through a board of directors. And this would So there's some things would have to go through a board of directors, but most of these transactions can be through an administrator. And this could facilitate or hinder the way the company works. And then we have the different possibilities in the administration of the company. And does it have to be a Mexican resident in Mexico? That's an important and interesting point, because here there's an issue which is the General Alien Act. And in that situation, there are companies that, depending on their social aim, their social purpose, they could be restricted to a certain percentage of shares for foreigners, or completely restricted for foreigners, and that would have to be all nationals. Now, there are other companies, depending on the aim or the purpose of the company, where they don't have these restrictions, and they could be a foreigner. So the problem is, if it's a company that wants to establish itself in Mexico and comes without knowing anybody, and that's where we find some major problems that we can help to resolve, because at the end of the day, it's a company that needs a local partner to be able to execute its activities, its business activities. Now, depending on the activities, they'll be restricted or not. Thanks very much for that. Now, I would like to know how this works. You've been in Peru for more than 10 years, working as a consultant for Spanish companies, basically. Well, in Peru, there's not regulation that limits the participation of foreigners in companies. There is no limit that a physical or foreign person can participate in the company. What it does limit is that the legal representative has to be a national or a resident in Peru. Now, as Gabriel explained, this is due to terrorism, narco-traffic, which is prevalent in these countries, and limits that the legal representative has to be a resident in Peru or a Peruvian. Now, something to keep in mind is that the legal representative is not an executive. It's just a legal representative. So that's the General Company Act in Peru that requires that. Now, what does that mean in practice? When you form a company, you have to name a legal representative who is going to be the general director. But when you name that general, so in other words, it's only a legal position, not an executive position, and it's established in the Company Act in Peru. And they have responsibility with any public debt that the company may have. So he would be responsible for all of the tax obligations of the company. Yes. Well, there's many countries in Latin America have points in common. Peru and Chile, we're going to go back to Patricio in Chile. So there's a lot of things that they share in common. Regulators, I think, yeah, especially the Andean countries, they have a system which is very similar. Patricio, please, could you clarify these things about how things work in Chile? Well, here, in most countries, it's going to depend on the legal status of the company that's formed. There are companies that have a board of directors. Other type of companies assign a legal representative. At least in our country, there's no restriction on the nationality of that person. But we recommend that the legal representative should at least be a resident in Chile for operational purposes, for tax and commercial reasons. For example, if there's a labor issue, then it'll be much easier. If the representative is outside of the country, then there'll be certain issues that will be more difficult to resolve. So there's no restriction, but a good practice, as a good practice, we suggest that if it's a foreigner, he or she should be a resident in the country, or maybe the representative could be of Chilean nationality, a national of the local country where the company is located. That's our suggestion. Thanks very much, Patricio, for that. Christian, please. Well, in Ecuador, it's a very similar situation. As you said, we share a lot of things in common. Almost all of us have very similar types of systems. However, in Ecuador, there is a limitation for the general director or the legal representative if he or she is a foreigner. If there's an investment, it has to be controlled at origin. However, as our colleagues have already said, it's important to be present for all of the different paperwork that needs to be done. And usually, this is usually done, it's usually a company that will exercise the legal representation for the parent company, and this generates a whole legal process. But the operational part, as such, would be the company itself that would take care of that. That's how this is dealt with in Ecuador. So there aren't many restrictions in terms of nationalities or anything like that. There are companies that have completely foreign capital, but their main staff person or staff people are all foreigners. In this case, they don't really but they would have some trusted people, local trusted people. So one thing is the legal part, the responsibility, and another part would be the operational part, doing paperwork, opening a bank account, for example, which would have to be done maybe by, yes, opening a bank account could be a problem because you might have all of your operations ready, and there are cases where you can't, you don't have any place for funds to be sent. So this is why the legal representative in the country is very important. Yes, these are important issues, and timing as well, not wait until the very end to open a bank account, for example. In Colombia, Sergio, how does it work? Well, there are no restrictions in Colombia for the legal representative to be a resident or not. The thing is, if it's not a resident, then they would have to register as a taxpayer. But in practice, if a Spanish company sets up operations in Latin America, they need a legal representative, and it's the person in Spain that's going to carry out the operations in Latin America, or the person who's going to take care of all of the landing of the company in South America. They would need a replacement as well, a number 2 person in charge, so we don't have any issues with who's signing and who's not. But we're also very careful that if with that the second in command, the replacement legal representative, it's very important that they have a certain minimum salary so that they can exercise that authority. So they're very careful with their assets and information, so it's important that the board appoints that person. That person needs to be officially, the replacement person that needs to be officially named by the board of the company and should be in the country where the activity takes place to sign contracts, labor contracts, and so forth. Well, that's maybe a different aspect in Colombia, the legal representative or the replacement legal representative. Do you have that kind of person in other countries as well? This maybe there could be a limit on transfers and so forth, but in the case of Colombia, there's usually replacement persons, a number 2 in charge, a number 3 in charge, for example. Now going on back to Mexico, which clearly is a very attractive country with a large internal demand or domestic demand, and there a lot of growth in North America and in Central America. I would like to know, before becoming established in Mexico, if you could make a recommendation to deal with tax issues or commercial activity in the country, but also in the bordering countries. Yes, this is an interesting issue, Alejandro, because since Spain or Madrid is the door of entry to Latin America and Europe, and vice versa, Mexico is the entry into the United States and Central America. So it's interesting because despite the complexity of the territory, almost 2 million square kilometers, more than 11,000 kilometers of coast, we have a situation where, as companies, or when companies come or to establish themselves, they don't know how to act. They don't know what to do because they come to this huge area, geographical area, and they don't know how to control this situation. And this is the big problem that most companies have that arrive to Mexico. And here, the issue is quite simple, really, that if they're established, if they're in operation, and they want to extend their market to the United States or to Central America, then they can opt for creating an affiliate in the United States or simply look for a partner in the United States to carry out activities. And similarly, in Central America, they would do the same thing. So it's easy and simple from Mexico to have a place to sell the final product as business people towards the United States or Central America. The issue here is the way that we're going to pay taxes. If we are in Mexico, established in Mexico, then the profits would be obtained in Mexico, and we'd have to pay taxes in Mexico. So they'd have to do the invoicing in Mexico and pay the taxes according to the tables that I mentioned earlier. Now, if they want to become established in Mexico, it's a big opportunity, really, because of the openness. It's an open door to North America, to the United States, and for Central America. And depending if we're going to establish the company, it's important to know the strategy and development of the service or product of the company, because there are places in Mexico and the United States, or in Mexico, where the taxes go down if you're a manufacturer or if you engage in services, etc. So it's important to know what the company purpose is. You could establish yourself here and have a tax break, because maybe in that state of Mexico, taxes would be lower depending on the type of activity that you engage in. And as we know that Spain has this double taxation agreement with different countries here, with Ecuador, with Colombia, with Mexico, with Chile. But with Peru, we don't have this agreement. So how do we solve that issue, which looks like it could be a difficulty, this double taxation issue? Well, in the case of Peru, the most reasonable alternative is to look for a country that does have this agreement to avoid double taxation. In other words, countries where you can have set up your tax issues in Mexico or Colombia and through that country, because this lack of agreement is surprisingly, it's quite a delicate situation and difficult to solve. So the alternative for SMEs especially would be to set up an affiliate in countries that do have that double taxation agreement. So this is a recurring problem, like in Chile, when they went to do business in Peru, set up business, how do they set that up? But if they went to do it from Spain or Germany and for France, they don't know how to do that because they have this issue of the double taxation. Yes, exactly. So the alternative is to look for a country that does set up a triangle where they do have this agreement. So it might you might have to set up a structure that does have with a country that does have this agreement. Well, now we're going to open the floor to questions. So this is the end of the first part of the seminar. And we'll begin now with the Q&A session. Thanks very much. But by protocol, we just need 3 minutes. We're going to do a little bit of cleaning, and we'll be right back. So thank you very much.
Welcome back. Good afternoon. We're still talking about legal frameworks and taxation agreements in Latin America and how that affects strategies of companies establishing themselves in Latin America. We've got the CEO of MSH Global, Alcázar, and two other guests. Thank you very much. Those of you here on site and those of you via streaming. So we go on to our round table with Gabriel from Mexico, Sergio from Colombia, and Patricio from Chile, who's still online, remotely following us. And same as in the first round table, we were talking about related transactions between countries, legal obligations, of representatives, and so on. Now we'll focus on the moment when the entrepreneur, the European entrepreneur, is already in Latin America, arrives in Latin America, and needs to choose which country he will establish himself, if there are incentives for investment, depending on one sector or the other. And we'll start with Sergio from Colombia. So I'll ask you quite a repeated question. Are there tax incentives for investment projects in Colombia? Well, in that case, we need to say that in the Latin American market is perceived from 2 points of view, from the United States and from Europe. Colombia is open to South America when you come from the United States. But in Europe, things are different. In Europe, you tend to go to the Chilean company because you are more similar culturally and in other terms. Until recently, Colombia was not going for so much for competitiveness or for attracting foreign investment, so Mexico, Peru, Mexico and other countries were an option. So we tried to make Colombia more attractive for investment, and we had to ask ourselves to invest in what? So we decided to incentivize companies offering a technological added value. For example, companies focusing on developing software, computer science, advising services, and so on, receive stimuli, incentives. There is a ministry responsible for this, and that ministry says, okay, you as a company will not need to pay taxes for the first 7 years once the agreement is signed and approved. But in order to do that, a company is required to present a business plan, and at least 3 jobs need to be created in order to benefit from that tax exemption. And 35,000 euros should be generated during the first 3 years. So that incentive is for European companies that need to jump into Latin America, for companies which were already present in Latin America. Well, this is for any company incorporated in Colombia. It was designed for companies. These companies need to be incorporated by the 31st of December 2021. Creativity is also fostered, and they mean filmmaking, works of art, libraries, all those activities, cultural activities, are incentivized. A project needs to be presented in order to get that exemption. Colombia, as many other Latin American countries, focuses on the agricultural industry. So there are also tax exemptions for companies investing in our agriculture. That exemption lasts for 10 years, and that exemption is related to the income obtained by that company. So if you've got low income, you can create one job. If you've got medium-sized income, you can perhaps create 3 jobs, and so on. And wind energy was also promoted. So companies wanted to invest on that, developing projects there. They've got a tax exemption of 15 years of duration. There were other activities that were considered, for example, the building sector, building social housing. New housing was also promoted. All income coming out of that building of social housing will be exempt.
También tienen beneficios tributarios que son renta exenta. Ahora, existen otros beneficios tributarios.
There are other tax exemptions for companies doing research, technological development, and innovation. Those companies need to present a project as well to the Colombian entity responsible for approving those projects, and then a budget is established. For example, I can say I'm going to invest 10,000 euros in the innovation of my company there, and that will be considered as expenditure of the company, and 25% of the value approved by the relevant authority will be a tax exemption. So I'll detract that from the amount of money that I've got to pay in taxes. But entrepreneurs do not know this possibility too well. They think that innovation is just to discover a new element for the periodic table. No, innovation can have to do with improvements for the company itself on how to set up a new process for any component of the company. Yes, as you said, same as in other countries of the world, in Colombia, attracting foreign investment has been more and more important, and to that end, governments are being more flexible and less restrictive by means of tax incentives, encouraging competitive sector companies to come to the country and develop their activities in the destination country. You said that Chile was the traditional door to South America. So Patricio, I think he's got something to tell us. Patricio, can you hear us? Yes, I do.
Sí, quería comentarte. Sí,
yes, Patricio, just one comment.
Aprovechar lo que había comentado Sergio para,
as Sergio was saying,
desde tu punto de vista, ¿cuál es el motivo
in your opinion,
que hace que Chile sea la puerta de
why
entrada
is Chile
haya venido siendo la puerta de entrada
traditionally
europeo hacia América Latina?
open to Latin America for European entrepreneurs, for European companies? It is because you are flexible, because of legal certainty, any advantages for foreign investment? Why is it? Yes, there are several factors fostering investment in Chile. One of the most important ones is legal certainty. Investment is protected in Chile. Certain incentives have been defined for certain productive areas that make those areas quite attractive, and taxation is quite reasonable in Chile. So we are quite competitive. For Colombia, we still attract investment for us and for other countries in Latin America. Regarding tax incentives, we are trying to improve our digital processes, and that has fostered commercial activities, because we could have the case that someone is willing to start up a project, a commercial project, but they might find different obstacles that delay their activity. Of course, there are certain projects that need an approval. Everything that has an environmental impact needs an assessment, as in any country. But in general, activities such as service provision or engineering, production, and investment are quite attractive for foreign investors.
Perfecto. Y Gabriel,
Yes.
Sí, perdón, Patricia, sí, continúa.
Sorry, Patricia, you were saying.
Sí, no, solamente mencionar que en
Yes.
materia más impositiva
Regarding taxation, there are incentives that are quite reactive. For example, for remote areas in the country, there are mechanisms to attract investment. For example, you could get a return of 30% of your taxes on the investment. There are also free zones for exchange, not just with different regions of the country, but with other countries of Latin America. So for those companies that invest a lot, they can benefit from tax reliefs. So we're still attractive, being a hub for regional investment.
Gabriel, México,
very well. So, Gabriel, Mexico, if we go to Mexico, we need our horses, let's say, because it's a huge country, how Mexico does things. Which are the sectors you think are being mostly promoted in Mexico? As I said just a moment ago, Raúl, Mexico is too big. And you can implement virtually anything. You just need to find the right place for your situation. For example, if you want to set up a factory for motor components in Mexico City, you can do it, but it will be much more difficult and much more expensive than doing it in another area. For example, around Leon, where we have automobile companies benefiting from certain tax exemptions for the production of their items. What do we promote? Well, there are certain situations in Mexico in which we make an effort to keep certain tax incentives. However, the one deciding on incentives are states. We've got 32 states in Mexico, 32 regions, let's say, and each state, each Mexican state can set its rules, not regarding federal taxes, but in local taxes. And they can help companies implement technology or set up a factory and create jobs. For example, they can help them when finding the piece of land, or they can help them by pardoning certain taxes, certain taxes on the income of employees because of the amount of jobs that are going to be created. The Federation has set up these specific areas for business, but each of the cooperatives seeks to grow on their own in order to create more jobs for their local population, to increase their production in comparison with other states of the Republic of Mexico. So there's competition, positive competition between states. And as I said at the beginning, we need to look for the aim of the company. We need to know that aim clearly in order to choose the place. So those of you who are experiencing this situation in your countries, in the context of this pandemic, how do you feel the European entrepreneur is feeling about their projects? Are their projects being affected by the pandemic? How are the governments reacting? Are there reforms? Do governments in your region know to adapt to social unrest in your countries?
Well, in terms of the pandemic, we need to look at this from each sector. There's some sectors who are really affected a lot, and others menos. It has to do with the area. If it has to do with technology, those that deal in technology, they say actually the pandemic has been very good for them because of teleworking. I didn't have to go to Colombia to set up a physical office. There's no problem. They can have an address for correspondence and have everyone working remotely from home. So the pandemic, the company has helped companies to get over the pandemic and has given salary support to companies since April. They started with this type of subsidies for companies that are in this situation. The first most important thing for the employers is how to pay their staff. And so there was also some tax reforms in Colombia, Spain, and other places to help support employers due to the pandemic. And now there's a draft law in Colombia, but due to some issues, the draft law was removed, but we are trying to help companies. So the issue also support in paying staff was really a real help for companies, and the pandemic affected some sectors a lot, others not. So you have to look at each particular case. In the case of Chile, Patricio, how did the pandemic affect the country in this sense? Well, since the end of 2019, with all this social uprising, in 2020 there was a lot of economic turmoil with the recession, and then in 2021 all of this has affected economic development. Now, to address this, the state came up with a series of measures. There was a transitional soft credit mechanism to subsidize people who are affected from losing their jobs. So there was direct subsidies for the unemployed,
obviamente no estaba considerado ningún presupuesto, por lo
but
tanto hay una
there was no budget
situación
set aside for this. So
obviamente generar
this has generated
recursos suficientes para cubrir no tan solo
difficulties to
las
come up with the
necesidades básicas, sino
resources.
todo lo que a futuro se pueda desarrollar. ¿Eso qué significa?
This means
Significa que el Estado debe recaudar más
that the
impuestos.
country has to collect more
El
taxes.
problema en Chile,
At least today in Chile, the source of taxes
aproximadamente 80%
or
del presupuesto de la nación
80% comes from taxes. 80% of the national budget comes from taxation. So there's going to be another tax reform. This will be the third tax reform in a very short period of time. So over the medium or long term, there will be this new reform, and that will affect the corporate and individual tax rate. In the case of Mexico, Gabriel, in Mexico, we have all types of reforms today. There was a reform even of clean energies, and the Congress passed this, but unfortunately, the courts have suspended that reform because it affected investment in clean energy. The government wanted to go back to fossil fuel, but I think that was a big error due to climate change. This is not the topic of the forum, but I think we should mention that. And secondly, due to the economic issue, all of the investments that we have in clean energies, all of the companies that have established operations in Mexico in the different wind farms that exist here, and that affects us as Mexicans and also the companies and the work and the taxation. So at the end of the day, I think this is a whole chain. There are tax reforms, some small tax reforms, I should say, that have affected us as business people, but we have been able to move forward despite these issues. Fortunately, Mexico is a large country in all senses of the word, and we are resilient. And as Sergio said, we have to see this from different angles or perspectives. This pandemic has affected different sectors in different ways. Some sectors were negatively affected, but still were able to subsist. Now, other sectors reduced their operations because people couldn't continue with all of their business activities, and there were still others that grew. They grew tremendously, and there are some that renovated, that reinvented themselves, and maybe went from the services sector to selling health products, for example. So some companies reinvented themselves and moved forward in that way. I should recognize, however, that the Mexicans in general worked extremely hard. The Mexican business people worked very hard. The workers from the Mexican businesses worked very hard, and also the foreign companies established in Mexico also worked very hard. They employing Mexicans and not taking out their capital, and stayed here to continue to support growth or maintain growth and maintain the country, and also looking to forward growth in my country. Another thing that I wanted to mention to all three of you, and this is quite frequent when you are thinking about going to another market, how do you think the strategy should be planned in terms of taxation with things that need to be kept in mind, because business people have a lot of questions. What's the corporate tax rate? How can I recover my investment and so forth? What were some key points that a business person should keep in mind who wants to establish themselves in Latin America? Well, when a business person is going to go international, it's an important decision because they're going to make sure that the business is profitable, first of all. In the case of Peru, there was no double taxation. And so what the companies do, if they're going to have a big operation, they establish themselves in Colombia, because we do have this double taxation agreement. And between Colombia and Peru, there is a double taxation agreement. It's a multilateral agreement in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. So that is a very beneficial agreement for companies because it's the UN model. This is a model generated by rich countries. The UN model, I should say, is between countries. You countries then follow these guidelines, but you establish how you want to establish your double taxation agreement for real estate, business profits, and so forth. The important thing is to know what is the tax rate in Colombia. As I said, historically, or at least in the past, it was we're taxing at 34 or 36%. And 2 years ago, it went down to 34, 32, and now in 2021, we're at 31%, and next year, it's going to be 30% tax rate. Now, why? Because our large companies are we're going to other countries now. In the case of Spain, they usually go first to Chile as the gateway to South America. And it's now they're jumping from Chile to Peru. So Colombia then saw this and said, well, we wanted to capture some of this foreign investment because they do generate employment. We have customers that have 400 or 500 employees. So this really helps our economy. So we're trying to see what is the tax rate, if there's an agreement or not, to see how we can work with that to get the maximum tax savings. We have customers now that have come from France, and they're going to engage in activities in Colombia. Now, they don't know how to do it, maybe through a company, setting up an office, do it from France. So there, each country has its specificity, and for sporadic or a single operation, no person or no company is going to set up an office, because that would be very expensive to maintain that company in another country rather than operating it from the mother country. So these international issues, when we negotiate prices, it's usually tax-free. So you set up the prices, the labor, and it's all tax-free. Now sometimes that burden is paid by the country, and I think that with that response, I think that opens up another issue, and that many people ask us about. Right now, there's a lot of movement in renewable energies, photovoltaic energy, and so a recurrent question is, I'm going to develop a project in 4 or 5 months, and I have to come back. Why do I have to constitute a company, pay workers? Why can't I just
desarrollo mi
bring in
proyecto,
my
me
workers,
vuelvo para
develop
acá
the
y como es
project, and
entre
then
empresas
come
europeas, lo
home.
facturamos aquí,
And
apañamos aquí
since
todo
we're
y
in
ya
Europe, we'll
está.
do everything here in Europe.
Y normalmente ante una situación como
And
esa de una
given that
empresa
type
que
of
va a ir solo para estar
situation
unos
where
meses en el
you're
destino,
only
va a
going for a
desarrollar
few
un proyecto
months
y después se
for
va a
a
volver,
project
¿es
in the company
necesario,
and going
tanto
home, is it
México,
necessary in
Gabriel, el
Mexico
que esa empresa se
for that
implante,
company to
deje beneficios
establish,
en el
to
país,
set up
deje
an
sus
office,
impuestos
to
allí,
pay taxes
aunque vaya a
in
estar 5 o 6
Mexico,
meses
even
y
if they're
después
only
se
going to be
vuelva,
there for
o
5 or
podría
6 months and
desarrollar
then
su
go
actividad
home?
desde...
Or can they carry out their activity from the home country? Before I give an answer, I have to ask you a question. Where are the resources coming from to make the payments? For example, if the resources are coming from Mexico to be paid outside, or are they foreign companies who are providing the funds? That's the first question. And that's a question to be able to give you an answer. I need to know that context first. So, my answer is no, it's not necessary to set up an office to establish a company in Mexico. If it's a sporadic or one-off type of operation, there's no problem. The only thing is that they would have to go with all of their staff from the place of origin in Europe, Spain, France, or wherever, Germany, Italy, wherever. They can go, but they'll have to get a visa. They'll have to get a special visa because they're work visas. So we'll have to see who is going to hire them. Therefore, it can't be a foreign company. It has to be a national, a Mexican company that hires them. So then they'll send the work letters and they'll say that they're the specialists to engage in this activity, and they'll be requesting the visa for 6 months because the project will take 4 months, for example. So then they finish up the project in 4 months. They invoice, and next is the big problem. When we're going to send that money out of the country, since it's not going to be taxed in the country because it's an operation that was executed in the country, but the taxation, the benefits are going to a foreign country, automatically a 25% tax rate is charged to send currency outside of the country. So, as I said, the question is, where is the money coming from and where is it going? Now, if it was 2 foreign companies that are going to do business in Mexico, we need 1 Mexican partner that will issue the visas and so forth, because that circle cannot be closed if we don't have some point in Mexico, some origin in Mexico that's going to request the work visas and so forth. They could. They need an invitation to come to Mexico, and the Mexican company then can send those visa letters out. And there could be 2 foreign companies, and one has an affiliate in Mexico. That's a possibility as well. And so then that company will benefit from the work being carried out. So then we would have to justify the payments. So if the mother company was paying another money company, there would be a problem because we couldn't justify that your people were coming to carry out a job in Mexico. So then we would have a problem for that affiliate because if the work, let's say, costs 200,000 euros, they're going to make their evaluation. They're going to say, no, for us, we value this in 300,000 or 400,000 euros, and then they'll tax it. So that's where you'd have to verify that it wasn't 400,000, but rather 200,000, and that's where the problems begin. To prevent all of that difficulty, we have to see how the transfers could be made But there are ways to do it, but we always have to have an anchor in Mexico. It could be the company that's the hiring company or the affiliate, but we need an anchor in Mexico. And you can go with your own workers for 4 months and go back, and you don't need to establish an office or a company in Mexico. Another important point that I'd like to put on the table, and Patricia, I'm going to ask this question to you. What is the labor cost, the social security cost for workers in Chile? Well, that's an important point that you bring up, because when an investor comes to Chile, they find a completely different labor culture here. Generally, the Social Security payment is paid by the worker. Each person is responsible for their own Social Security payment, and within their salary, the employer then withholds that amount that corresponds to the Social Security. It's about 20% of the salary. There are differences, but approximately it's 20%. But there are also certain payments that the employer has to pay, between 4 up to 7%. These are payments that have to be paid directly by the employer. So generally, when I agree on the question is, when I have a contract, you have to be very careful to say whether it's the gross salary or the net salary. You'd have to, if it's the gross salary, it would include the Social Security withholding payment paid by the worker and so forth. So, and that wouldn't be in the net salary. So that is something that you do have to consider, and that depending on the type of activity, there are some where the rate might be a little bit higher than other activities. So that's an important factor that needs to be considered when one is making an investment project. There are a whole series of benefits as well, legal benefits, often, of these. Or some of these have to be paid in the projects, in the valuation of the project itself.
So in the case of Colombia, Sergio, what would you say? Well, when a person is recruited there, there's the social security aspect, and on the other hand, the social benefits. Social security is related to disease, pension, family benefits. We're talking about 21% for social security. That 21% is absorbed by the employer. So the employer absorbs an additional 8% burden, depending on whether they earn more than 10 minimum salaries or less. In the case they earn more, they have an additional 1% burden, and for the company there would be an additional 16%. 20% would also be applicable to other concepts, for example, vacation and others. Payment of those taxes may take place monthly, annually, but they need to be taken into account. So investors need to take into account this 41%, which is additional. So many companies recruit freelancers. In the case of international companies, the freelancer, the self-employed worker, is quite common.
las empresas nuevas cuando se implantan para no
That's the
tener que
case of
pagar la información
ADECO
que tiene
or
personal
startups or new companies
ese
coming
tipo
into the country so that they can
virtualidad.
reduce costs
En el caso de
in that
México,
respect.
Gabriel.
And in the case of Mexico, Gabriel, what would you say?
La verdad es que es
Well, in
una
Mexico,
cuestión compleja.
that's a complex question because first of all, we need to know how much is the worker going to earn. And depending on that, we've got different scales. We love scales in Mexico. I don't know why. For example, if a worker earns the minimum salary, the minimum wage, the tax burden is allocated to the employer, and a certain percentage is detracted from the worker's salary. And on top of that, he'll have to pay 2% of payroll, then social security costs, and other concepts as well. So the worker on a minimum wage will be having 28% expenditure. If we talk about higher salaries, executive salaries, let's say, then besides all what we are already paying, namely social security, 2% payroll, and other concepts, we would have to detract income tax on the salary of the worker. And that tax needs to be paid by the worker, the employee, so the employer needs to detract that percentage from the salary of the worker and then give it to the tax authority. Then in the tax returns of the worker, the declaration, everything will be balanced. So there could be a 35% loss of the salary, including salaries, contributions, etc. So now that we are talking about figures, I would like to ask you a question. What is the tax percentage for income tax and corporate tax, and how does the tax on heritage work? Sergio, Colombia. Well, in the case of corporate tax, it's around 31%. Next year, around 30%, so it's being reduced. And in the case of tax on heritage, tax on assets, every time there's a reform, around 250,000 euros are subjected to a tax, and the payment of those taxes are paid throughout a four-year period, taking into account the 1st of January of the year on which there was cause for paying that tax. Colombia also has an agreement for income tax and tax on heritage, so those companies will also have to pay taxes in Colombia, even if they are foreign. So in Chile, Patricio, what's the situation there? In the case of corporate tax or income tax for the company, we've got to distinguish between big companies, and in that case the percentage is 25% taxes. But for companies that are smaller, SMEs,
ellos tienen
more or
una
less, under certain conditions,
similar empresarial del
they
25%.
pay 25% corporate
Producto de
tax.
toda la contingencia que hemos vivido estos
And because of
últimos meses, se
all
estableció una
the
reducción gradual de tasa a
changes
10%.
we've had in the last few months, 10% was established temporarily.
Nuestra legislación incorpora igual una serie de exenciones
Our
que
laws
permiten a las empresas se pueden
also
aplicar,
provide
pero esto
for
hasta el día de
certain
hoy
exemptions
ya se
that
está
can be
discutiendo eventualmente
offered,
futuras reformas a futuras. Ya
and
solamente
there's already a discussion on future
van a caer en
reforms
este gobierno, van a
that
caer
are
al
not
gobierno
going
siguiente,
to be
pero que claramente
an issue for this
están
government, but rather for the
la
next one,
recaudación
but
fiscal.
will aim at
Obviamente,
increasing
la tasa del
tax
cuerpo
collection,
corporativo
so corporate
sufra
taxes
un aumento,
are
obviamente no puede
bound to
exceder de los 10%.
go
La
up
región se
in the
está
future.
medio
Of course, we cannot go beyond
aplicando.
the regional average,
Eso es el día de hoy, con una
but
perspectiva también de
that's the
crecimiento
situation
en la tasa
today.
futura del cuerpo.
That would be the percentage, but it's bound
Gabriel, en el caso de
to go up,
México,
as I said.
Raúl,
Gabriel,
mira,
in Mexico,
nosotros para calcular el impuesto sobre la renta,
in order to calculate
tenemos una fórmula en la cual nosotros
income
obtenemos
tax,
el beneficio,
we apply a formula
se
in
le
which
resta
we consider
las tablas. Te
profit.
digo que tenemos todo muy
We also
estructurado.
have tables. We are
con
very
escalas y
structured, very orderly, with different scales.
Se sacan,
And
con
within
esas
those
tablas
tables, or
se
by
le
means of
aplica
those
un factor.
tables,
Ese
we
factor se
extract a
divide
factor,
por la ganancia,
which is
y
multiplied by
y ese
earnings,
factor, o a ese resultado se le
and
multiplica
the
el
result
porcentaje del impuesto.
is
La tasa
multiplied
impositiva,
by
para
the
las
percentage
sociedades
of the
va
tax.
desde el 1.82%
It goes from
hasta el 30% para
1.8% to
personas morales, y para
30%
personas físicas va desde el
in the case of
1.82
companies,
hasta el 35%.
and for natural persons
De
from
esta
1.8%
forma es como se debe
to
tasar año
35%.
con año,
So
lo que sería
each
el
year,
impuesto sobre la renta. Y
that's
es muy
how
importante
we
que, por ejemplo, cuando tú
impose
cierras tu año fiscal,
income tax, and it's very important that
tengas
on the
perfectamente bien
31st of
establecido
December,
cuáles van a ser tus números en cuanto a beneficios, ganancias,
you
gastos,
know very well
porque
which
cada año es cuando se
figures
saca
you're
ese
going to
factor.
present,
Ese factor
earnings,
nos va a ayudar, si
expenditure,
es muy alto,
because you will
a que tus impuestos,
obtain your
durante
factor
todo ese
from
año,
those
de
calculations.
se van a incrementar en cuanto a números y en cuanto a porcentajes, o si es muy bajo nos va a ayudar
If
a que
it's
se
a
disminuya.
low
Entonces, eso es lo que hay que
number,
ir,
then there will be a
viendo, y es lo
reduction,
que hay que ir cuidando
and if it's
para
a
que la
high
empresa,
number,
de
there will be an
repente
increase.
no vaya a dar un gran
So
salto en
the
cuanto
company
a-
needs to be
a
aware
pagar
of that
impuestos,
figure at the
¿no?
end of the
Y
year,
vaya a tener que-
so that there are
vaya a hacer más
not
los impuestos
too
que gana que los beneficios que tiene,
considerable ups
o los
and
impuestos
downs,
que paga que los beneficios que tiene.
and
Y,
the company might be
de esta forma,
paying
pues, van a
more
tener
taxes than
una,
the
contabilidad y una
profit they
administración
are
saneada,
making.
¿no?
So
y por supuesto, siempre con los impuestos a tiempo para poder, como yo digo, dormir
companies
tranquilos,
need to pay
¿no?
their
Pero esa es
taxes
más o menos la-
on
la
time so
función
that they
que
can
lleva a cabo.
be
En cuanto al impuesto
they can
patrimonio,
have
nosotros
peace of mind.
no nos aplica, pero sí nos aplica, por ejemplo, nosotros pagamos durante todo el año, las sociedades como las
We
personas
pay
físicas,
corporate
pagan
taxes
los impuestos
throughout the
mensuales
year
o provisionales,
as natural,
y al final del año se hace la
persons,
declaración anual
and at the
y,
end of the year,
se saca si hay alguna,
we
algún impuesto
do our
extra que
declaration,
pagar,
our
pues,
tax
se
returns,
paga
and if
esa,
there's an additional
remanente,
tax to
o si
pay,
no, pues, bueno, ya
then
se hace
it
las
is paid,
compensaciones correspondientes.
or if not,
Pero se le resta todo lo que
the
se pagó
corresponding
durante el año.
reimbursements or
Y eso nos va a ayudar a
compensations
sacar
are
el factor para el año siguiente,
done.
que puede ser igual,
And
o sea, no
that
paga
will
siempre lo mismo.
also give us the factor for the next year.
Todo depende de los
We
beneficios
don't
que se hayan
pay
obtenido
the same
durante el año.
amount every year. It all depends
Perfecto.
on the profits made on
Quería
each
agradecer
fiscal
enormemente
year.
el que hayáis estado
Well,
aquí con
I
nosotros,
wanted
nos
to
hayáis
thank you
acompañado
for being here
en
today
esta-
with
en
us,
esta
for
sesión
accompanying
durante estos
us
3 días, que sé que no ha sido fácil, ¿no? Por la situación
during
en la que vivimos,
these
el poder
3
viajar, el poder
days.
estar
I
aquí
know it's not easy to
desde
travel
América
right
Latina,
now,
llegar con nosotros.
to come
En el
here
caso de
from
Patricio,
Latin
pues,
America.
no
In the case
ha
of
sido
Patricio,
posible, ¿no?
it
Por el
wasn't
cierre de
possible to have
fronteras.
him
Se lo agradezco
here
igualmente que se haya podido
because of the
conectar por
closed
streaming.
borders, but it's
Y a
great
los
that he could
compañeros
follow
de la mesa
us
anterior,
via
a
streaming,
Héctor, que venía
and
desde-
I also thank
desde
Héctor
Perú, y a Cristian desde
from
Ecuador.
the previous
Y
roundtable,
para
and
cerrar un
Christian
poco, antes
coming
de
from
pasar el
Ecuador.
turno a las preguntas que puedan haber,
And before
preguntar si queréis comentar
going
algo,
on
si
with our
queréis,
round of
si os ha
questions,
quedado algo en el tintero que querráis
if you want
decir, que
to
queráis animar al empresario
say anything
que
else,
está
or
ahora
you
mismo un
want
poco
to
en duda de seguir
encourage
hacia vuestros países, el
entrepreneurs
porqué,
to
cuál es
go
el
to
valor
your
añadido que creéis
countries,
que pueden tener, y
which is the added
tenéis la
value
palabra
that you
brevemente cada
would
uno para
offer them, if you want to say
El
something
tema
before
ahora es que los empresarios
wrapping
y
up.
se ve en esta rueda de
Well,
negocios están muy escépticos por
The
el tema
truth
de
is
invertir
that
en Colombia por lo que
entrepreneurs
está
are
pasando
quite
hoy en
skeptical
Colombia.
about investing in Colombia because of the
Otros me
current
comentaron, no,
situation.
al contrario, este es el momento de invertir.
And I would
Porque las
tell them
inversiones
this is the moment to invest there. Quite the
de un país a
contrary,
otro, por más
because
que yo decida
investments
hacerlo hoy,
from
el
one
trámite, la
country
burocracia
to
y
another
todo se tarda 1, 2 o 3 meses.
takes its
Entonces,
time.
apenas pase
So
esto, si la decisión se
you will
toma
need 2
ahora,
or 3
es el
months. So
momento
if you make the
ideal para
decision
poder
right
invertir,
now,
para
it's
reactivar la economía
the
y
best
para que podamos
moment
tener un beneficio
to invest,
sobre
to
la actividad que se
make
desarrolle.
real profit, and
Bueno, en México
that would
nosotros
be it.
tenemos una
Well, in Mexico,
situación en este momento.
our situation,
Yo creo que, como lo dije hace un momento,
as I said
es un
before,
país muy grande en todos los sentidos, tanto
is
en
particular.
territorio
Mexico is
como
very
en
big
cuanto a su gente.
in many senses
Y hemos podido
regarding its
sobrevivir
people,
a
its territory.
la crisis,
We were able
derivado
to
de- bueno, a la crisis de
survive
pandemia.
the
Ahora
crisis
que estamos sobreviviendo un poco a esta crisis
caused by the
económica,
pandemic. We are surviving
estamos
this economic
sobreviviendo un poco a la crisis
crisis
política.
as well, and the political crisis.
Yo creo que es un país maravilloso para
I
poder,
think Mexico
eh,
is a wonderful country for investment.
realmente, yo creo que es la oportunidad en este momento.
I think
para
opportunities
invertir.
are
¿Por qué?
there right now
Porque se están
for
dando muchos
investment because many
Muchos-
changes
muchos cambios
are
para bien.
taking place
cambios.
for the better.
Se están dando algunos otros cambios en los cuales
Some of the
también
changes
la sociedad está interviniendo para que sean para bien.
are also being driven by the society itself so that those changes can be positive.
Y de,
So I think it's the moment
de
to
explotar
go to
todo
Mexico
lo que México
and seize
puede dar,
all
que
the
aún
opportunities
cuando sus políticas públicas
that Mexico has
son las
to offer.
mejores,
Even
como
though
se dice,
Mexican
pero,
public policies are not the
como lo dije en
best,
un momento cuando
I
estábamos hablando, para eso
acknowledge
estamos
that.
nosotros, para ayudar
We're
al
there for
empresario,
that,
llevarlo
to
de la
help
mano,
you, to
y
help
que su
entrepreneurs,
llegada a México y su
accompanying
estancia en México
them,
sea lo
and
más
make their
placentero.
stay
El
and their
empresario se
arrival
dedique
in
a su
Mexico
negocio,
as
y
pleasant
nosotros en
as
México
possible,
nos vamos a dedicar a que
so that they
toda
can
opción
do their
pública,
business because we will be
financiera,
taking care
y
of the
laboral.
legal, financial, and work-related aspects of their activity,
Patricio desde Chile.
so that it works properly. Patricio, from Chile. I would just say a few words.
Que toda crisis en definitiva es una oportunidad.
All crises
Hoy día nosotros, por lo menos acá en Chile,
are opportunities.
como les comentaba anteriormente, del 2019,
In Chile,
finales del 2019,
at the end of
a una
2009,
recesión bastante significativa desde el punto de vista del impacto en la actividad económica.
pressure has been growing
Pero
on
también,
economic
finalmente,
activities.
en modificaciones y futuras modificaciones bastante relevantes.
There have been changes, and
Materia también,
more changes will take place, which are quite relevant.
puedan existir cambios que puedan afectar ciertas
And
o generar ciertos
future
aumentos positivos, pero
changes
realmente
might
en un
affect
rango
tax
razonable que sea coherente
rates,
con los aplicando
but in a reasonable way and in harmony with the percentages that in the whole Latin American region are valid. Chile has opened up borders not just for capital but also for immigration. We attract professionals from the whole region, also from Spain, Greece. We are quite a multicultural area, quite a multicultural country, and that fosters development and the attraction of good talent. And all that contributes to the development of business, together with the rest of the countries of the region. So we'll keep working on that. The important thing is that we generate ramifications in the sense that entrepreneurs evaluate the different possibilities in each jurisdiction and then make the decision.
son ejecutables en corto plazo, sino
Of
que
course,
requieren
many
procesos de
decisions are
implementación,
not
implantación,
executable
de mediano a largo plazo.
in the short term, but rather they need
Eso
their
nos han
medium or
invitado
long
y
term.
claramente, como señala también, estamos disponibles también
And
para dar todo el soporte
we are
de todo
available to
la inversión.
give entrepreneurs all the
Perfecto,
support
muchas
they need
gracias,
in their
Patricio.
investments.
Como reitero las gracias a todos por
Thank you very much,
participar, por
Patricio.
estar con
I thank you
nosotros
all for
estos
participating
3 días
in
del
these
encuentro Madrid
3
Platform.
days
Ya estamos finalizando
at
y
Madrid platform.
espero que
We are
para
about
todas
to
las personas que han
finish
estado aquí presentes
our
presencialmente y todas las personas que de manera online
events,
os habéis conectado,
and
hayamos
all of you,
conseguido
those
aclarar un poco más desde un punto de
physically
vista
present
fiscal y
here,
tributario lo que
those of
supone
you following us
para un
remotely.
empresario europeo
I
que quiera ir
hope
a América Latina,
it is
que
clear
debe
to
tener
you
en
all,
cuenta cómo debe
it is
actuar,
clearer to you
a
all
qué se
what
enfrenta
an entrepreneur
y
in Latin
sobre
America
todo, pues, el saber
should be
también cómo
aware of,
puede
what
recuperar su
they
dinero,
will
que creo
be
que es un aspecto
facing, how they
importante, ¿no?
can
que a
get
todos,
their
que a
money
todos nos
back,
preocupa. Y ahora
which
sí,
is
si os
something
parece,
of
vamos
concern to
dar
all of us.
turno a las preguntas que
And
pueda
now
haber
we'll
por
be
parte del
happy
público.
to answer any questions that the audience might ask. Is there any question here?
Por favor.
Go ahead. We need a microphone, please.
Creo que no se escucha, ¿no? Que no se está escuchando. A ver, si puedes repetir y la repetimos desde aquí, desde... Sí.
Sí.
At some point in the presentation, you mentioned it. Are tax authorities intervening in the policy for transfer prices? Is it a key topic on which the Spanish entrepreneur
Si se está preguntando para
should
nos escuchaba
focus?
respecto a la política de precios de transferencia, que se hablaba
Yes,
sobre ello,
the
si es
policy
algo
of
donde el empresario
teletransfer.
deba prestar una especial atención a
Is
ello
the Spanish
o no.
entrepreneur going to pay attention to, should the Spanish entrepreneur pay attention to that? Yes, in Colombia, they need to be careful because if related operations go beyond 250,000 euros, then yeah. If that operation is below 250,000 euros, the entrepreneur just needs to send a report on the value involved. Regarding Mexico, I would say that price of transfer would be 2 or 3 subsidiaries having the same amount, having the same partners or a common partner. In that case, the entrepreneur should be very careful with transfer prices because the tax authority is very strict about it, very rigorous, and they could even say that they are simulating operations and they could charge the full tax no matter what the operation might be. So here, the relation between people is very important. I cannot be present in 5 companies as a legal representative because if one company is going to provide the service, the other is going to provide staff, the other is going to provide resources. It's possible, but we should pay attention to certain parameters, taxations of transfer prices, evaluations, in case a tax authority asks us whether the transfer prices are harmonized with the market standards. So we would have to have very clear figures about it. If that's not the case, then there would be no matter of concern. Thank you very much, Raúl. Thank you, Patricio, on the other side of the ocean, and Gabriel as well. Thank you for making us aware of the importance of taxation for companies and investments, and also the importance of having a strategic plan as the one that MSH Global has. We're about to finish our session, but please don't go too far, because later we are going to talk about Madrid as a destination for foreign investment. See you later.